Hello, welcome to Politics and Prose. My name is Jasmine. I'm an event staffer here at Politics and Prose. Before we get started, just a friendly reminder to silence your cell phones if you haven't already. And a housekeeping note, when it's time for the Q&A portion of the event, we have a standing microphone over at the pillar here. If you're able, we ask that you walk up to the microphone to ask a question because we are audio and video recording, live streaming tonight. And also because Anna has to leave immediately at the end of the event, she's pre-signed a bunch of books which you can find at the register at the front of the store. All right, I'm very excited tonight to welcome Dr. Anna Malaika Tubbs, celebrating the release of her book, Erased: What American Patriarchy Has Hidden from Us. Dr. Anna Malaika Tubbs applies her signature blend of approachable yet rigorous analysis in this definitive and groundbreaking history of American patriarchy. She proves that humanity in the United States is determined by gender in a limited and flawed binary that is also always tied to whiteness. Tubbs shows how a fabricated hierarchy becomes so deeply ingrained over time that it now goes unnoticed, along with everything it intentionally conceals. Erased is the history of the United States from a new perspective, one where the people who shape this country, who've been oppressed and whose contributions have been denied, are at the center, reminding us that we can restore what has been strategically kept from us. Dr. Tubbs is a New York Times bestselling author and multidisciplinary expert on current and historical understandings of race, gender, and equity. And tonight, she's in conversation with Brittany, Packnett, Cunningham. Cunningham is a formidable force at the intersection of culture, justice, and policy, driving transformation as the founder and principal of Love and Power Works, a social impact agency catalyzing change across industries and communities. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Anna Malaika Tubbs and Brittany Packnett Cunningham.
Good evening, good evening. Thank you all so much for being here. Thanks to the folks joining us online. I'm Brittany Packnett Cunningham. That is quite an echo. I was not expecting it. I'm so glad we can have this conversation. I have to tell you all, I met Dr. Tubbs through her husband. So for those of you who don't know, her husband, Michael Tubbs, used to be a mayor in California, and we both spoke at the same TED conference. And I was like, wow, he's so impressive. And then I met his wife, and I was like, she's 10 times more impressive than you. I'm so sorry, former youngest mayor in the country. And so, like so many women I know, they are 10 times more impressive than their already impressive husbands. And if you have not already read Erased, you will find out exactly why. If you have not already read The Three Mothers, which is her first New York Times bestselling book, you will know why. And speaking of bestsellers, can we give an extra round of applause because this is officially now another bestseller.
Thank you so much.
And you were on the list with Tina Knowles, child. That's a hard list to get on.
It was emotional. I've been crying for several days.
You're just 2 degrees separated from Beyonce now. It's like your book, Mama Tina's book, Beyonce.
We were right next to each other on the list. It was very exciting.
Yeah.
So, and for me, I love celebrating mothers. So in a way, that's even more exciting for me. So.
Exactly. So I really want to dive into this because the thesis and premise of this book could not have been more timely if you had designed it yourself. The idea that American patriarchy is in everything, on everything, and absolutely everywhere, affecting everybody, is something that seems to surprise so many people right now. And yet, it very clearly explains how we've ended up in the place where we are. But before we get into Erased, I want to talk a little bit about The Three Mothers, because in this book, in that book, in all of your work and research, motherhood is so central. Why does that continue to be your lens?
Well, first of all, I feel like I'm dreaming being here with this incredible woman. Please give her another round of applause. Not only because of her incredible work, her bravery, her courage, the way she always stands in her truth, no matter what, but also because she has two little ones. One who is how old? How old is your youngest?
15 weeks.
15 weeks. So I'm just grateful, sis. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for having me. Absolutely.
Thank you. With that in mind, motherhood. I'm really passionate about telling the stories that other people try to hide and erase and bury. I spent my life traveling from country to country abroad as a result of my mother's work. She was a lawyer who advocated for women's rights in the US as well as abroad. And she told us to think about how women, but especially mothers, were being treated in each of the places that we lived. She saw that as the indicator for how countries would do overall, depending on how mothers were being treated. So if mothers were given the resources and the support that they deserved, she felt that that community, that city, or that nation would do well. People would be happy there. There would be a sense of community there. But if mothers were not treated well, if mothers were not being respected, that you would see some horrible ripple effects from that. And so I grew up always believing that the role of motherhood was incredibly influential and incredibly powerful. And so when I wrote The Three Mothers, that was one of the largest inspirations, but also I had just read Hidden Figures by Margot Lee Shetterly. And I was inspired because I was really angry after I read that book, that was the very first time I was learning these women's names. And the erasure of them was so strategic. And so I wanted to be somebody who found other hidden figures, and combining that with my love for the role of mothering before I became a mother myself. And while I was writing the book, I was expecting my firstborn. And so then the project became incredibly personal very quickly. And I knew that I needed to make sure people thought differently about the world through the women that I was writing about. With The Three Mothers in the first book, I'm talking about the mothers of MLK Jr., Malcolm X, and James Baldwin. And it was so sad that it took until 2021 for somebody to ask, after the dozens of books that have been written about these three men, who were the women who birthed and raised them? Who else was in the room that day that we celebrate January 15th, the day that MLK Jr. was born? Perhaps the woman who birthed him.
Maybe, just maybe.
And should we be curious about her life? And a lot of people say this was such a creative idea. How did you come up with it? In my opinion, it's not creative at all. And it's disheartening that it took that long. While it's my honor to be the person who introduced them to the world, it shouldn't have taken that long. And so Erased is a similar type of book where I was so shocked that we didn't already have a go-to book for understanding how patriarchy operates in our nation. But then at the same time, I realized that's not shocking. That's a result of American patriarchy, that we don't have somewhere where it's all synthesized for us. It's for us, where we can have all of the receipts, where we can apply that analysis to what we're seeing play out in current events. And so again, similarly, I said, oh, that book doesn't exist. I'm going to write it. And so that's what brought us to Erased.
And we're so, so glad that you wrote it. You know, what I appreciate about this book is it so clearly lays out that patriarchy is two things. One, it is everywhere all the time, doing all the things. And two, that it is intentionally hyper-visible and hyper-invisible, while it is also ubiquitous, right? That its ability to hide in plain sight is part of its functioning. You arrange the book in kind of 6 parts, which I'll come back to in a moment. But what's so brilliant, I think I was maybe like halfway through before I realized you had done this, by the way. But the chapter names, when you put them together in each section, are actually a sentence and a thesis statement in their own. So part 5, our sense of safety and community, the sentence and the chapter names say, none of us are protected from its growing reach, nor its seeds of division, nor its desire to sever our vision of new possibilities. So this idea that it is everywhere, operating all the time, trying to destroy what we are diligently trying to build, means that there are some obvious places where patriarchy shows up, right? We see it in LGBTQ issues. Happy Pride Month, everyone. We see it layered onto race, right? Especially as I think about Black Music Month and some of the conversations happening in Black music right now, some of them in a courthouse in New York. There are these really obvious layers of it, and then there are all of these ways that I know it absolutely surprises people. You talk about menstrual cycles and periods being a barrier and a layer and a functioning of the hierarchy of American patriarchy. What is the one way that it shows up that either surprised you or you found continuously surprises readers?
And I want to take it back to Three Mothers for a second, because so many people, when they read that book, are shocked that they didn't know that the three mothers did what their sons later became famous for, long before their sons were even a thought in their mind. And so many people asked me, how is that possible that we didn't know that? How did we not know that? Well, the answer is patriarchy. So it's not only in, like you said, these obvious moments, it's also in all the ways in which our information is co-opted, in which our stories are told. And already, although this book just came out, 10 days ago, so many people have asked me, but does patriarchy even still exist?
We need to say yikes, in case you didn't hear that in the back.
Yikes. They've said, you have 3 degrees, you're doing well. How could you say that patriarchy was still a barrier for you? And then at the same time, this explains why when Roe v. Wade is overturned, across the board, everyone is in shock and awe. How did this happen? When President Trump is reelected, how did this happen? How did this happen? And it's because we think that these different examples are separate of each other, that they're just random occurrences, when instead they're symptoms of the same disease. It's not an exception, sadly, what's happened to Cassie. That's right. Very much something that happens routinely. Mm-hmm. It's actually an exception that there's attention being paid to her, to a woman saying, this happened to me, and the nation is paying attention. And so a large part of this book, a huge goal of it, is to connect all of these different examples and show you that they are not separate, they are fully intertwined. And it brings me to what the thesis really is of this book. Patriarchy is, and especially why I say American patriarchy, there are different patriarchal systems across the world. And I'm not interested in saying which is better or worse than the other. They're all bad. Okay. But the US has its own unique gendered hierarchy, just like every country does. And one of the reasons we haven't been able to tackle it and dismantle it is because we think it operates the same, when instead it's going to depend on the context of each nation. It's going to depend on the founding documents of that nation. It's going to depend on who the leaders were who wrote those documents. And that's how we'll better understand the hierarchy that we find ourselves in. And so in the US, the documents were written by our founding fathers. And they wrote it after winning the Revolutionary War. They were very concerned that across the nation, the revolutionary spirit with which they won was spreading with everybody. And they were worried that they were going to lose the thing that they had fought for, to have power in this nation. And so they thought very carefully about how they were going to institute and organize this country, how they were going to institute their idea for what the world should look like. And they did it in a way that would favor themselves. And so they decide, we need to say who the elite men are in our nation. We need to define who gets to have power, who gets to have access to resources, who gets to vote. So they write the Constitution with that in mind. They obviously leave women out entirely. They're not even written into the Constitution. But based off that definition, that men get to have power, men get to vote, Men get to own land. Men get to enter into their own business decisions. We realize from that immediately that does not include all men. We realize even when they're talking about women, not in the Constitution, but in letters that they wrote, saying women are to be protected. Women are fragile. Women can't be trusted, and they also need to be controlled, but that they really need guidance. And what they have power in is reproducing the power of the men in their lives through children. And so that's when the role of motherhood becomes really important to the founding fathers, solely in its ability to reproduce their power. So we know from that not all women are being considered in that definition either. So we already see this setup of a problematic binary. We already see the subjugation of white women that are associated with the founding fathers. We already see the subjugation of poor white people who are also not being considered. We see the exclusion of people with disabilities. We see the exclusion of people who might not be heteronormative. We obviously see the exclusion of people who are enslaved and indigenous people, and the list goes on and on. It also creates this fear around anybody who's foreign. And so when we're talking about American patriarchy now, it includes that entire list that I just discussed. It's not solely about how do men feel about women. That's not patriarchy. That's not the battle we're discussing. It's about that we've been taught to fight for our right to be gendered in the US in this very problematic binary, but that many of us believed that was the only path to being treated as a human being in the US. And so we not only tried to assimilate to it, but many of us unconsciously protect it because we see it as our way to humanity. That's what I'm discussing in this book, why we've been tricked into that. And it's not a dismissal of any one group of people. It's not a critique of any one group. It's saying this is a system. It started as opinion, but then it turned into our national system through law. And there is no possible way we have fully gotten rid of it. So when we see the maternal health crisis play out, that affects all women, but especially women of color in the US, how could you tell me that we're not facing American patriarchy? When we see the continuance of a gender pay gap, how could you tell me that we're no longer facing American patriarchy? When you see continuous attacks against trans people, and you don't understand how that relates to American patriarchy, it just proves even more so why I needed to put this book out into the world.
So we're clearly having a very academic conversation that can feel dense and distant for a lot of people. What I think is so powerful, though, about your writing is that you break this down for us through story. So we understand disparate impact. We understand the lived experience and reality of the system that you're talking about, not through these kind of, graduate level concepts and language stuck in the ivory tower, but really through story. Is there one particular story from Erased that you think demonstrates exactly what you're talking about?
Oh, there's so many.
I mean, they all do, technically. This is why we read the book.
But I will say, it is really important to me. I am a proud nerd. I do love school. I love research.
Just like a Black woman. Let me go get another degree. Yeah.
With my 3 degrees. I do love school. But I really dislike when academics are solely talking to academics. It's something that bores me. I'm not interested in it. If you see me at an academic dinner, the whole time I'm like, ugh. It just feels very performative. There's so much jargon. So I purposefully communicate in ways that I think anybody could understand, whether that's a PhD who's in computer science or a high school student. For me, that's a much bigger accomplishment if anybody can engage with your work. And I will just tell you all a story from my own life. In my 3 degrees, I've always been told your work is too understandable. And I think I take it as a compliment. Thank you very much. But it's not what we often applaud in the academy. And so for me, it's been very intentional, and I've always had to really stand in that truth that that's the way I'm going to write. And I want people to enjoy the read. I want it to feel engaging, because that's how we actually can connect with the theory. And especially in the Black feminist tradition, this is for our survival. This is for us to understand what we're going through together as a collective. When the academy co-opts that theory and purposely makes it exclusive, something's gone wrong there. And so I promise you, I will never be that kind of author. Anytime you pick up my books, it will never be boring, and also will be a welcoming place to engage in this kind of theory. And so in terms of a story in the book, that it's all filled, every single part of it is stories, stories, stories. But one example that I use, and that's really stuck with me because it's just so heavy, is of a woman named Jessica Linehan. And it really shows what I'm talking about in terms of course, the intersectionality that comes with patriarchy, but also that we've not come as far as many people think we have. And so, I think we're okay. Okay. It happened in Colorado. Jessica Linehan had survived an abusive marriage, and she has a restraining order against her ex-husband. He continues to ignore this restraining order, and they have 3 children together. On one afternoon, he goes and decides he's going to take their daughters. And she calls the police multiple times and tells them, hey, he's violating his restraining order. And they say, well, at least you know your kids are with their father. So for more context, Jessica is a Latina woman. And she says, would they have believed me if I were a white woman? Were they judging me because I was Latina? Was I coming up against the biases that often happen that say, this horrible biases, they have too many children, they need to figure this, So she feels that just in this moment, she's coming up against years of bias when she solely wants to protect herself and her children. She keeps calling them, saying he hasn't brought them home. He hasn't brought them home. By the end of the day, when they finally find this man, they open his trunk, and the 3 daughters had been murdered. This case makes it all the way up to the Supreme Court. And although one of our greatest advocates for women's rights, RBG, is on the court at this point, the rest of the court votes that the police did not owe her anything. This was on a national level. And I say in the book, we have never seen yet in our nation's history an anti-patriarchal Supreme Court. We haven't yet seen it. And we don't currently have one either, certainly not with 3 appointees from President Donald Trump himself. We have not come as far as we think we have. And on every level, whether it was the local police officers that she dealt with, or even before that, the abusive husband she had to survive, but all the way up to our national court telling her, you don't deserve to be protected, even if it was written that there was a restraining order. We are not going to help you. So that's just one example of, I explain what we're up against, I walk you through it with someone's story so that we also are emotionally connected to this, because we can't be numb to it. That's the other thing that happens when we make something too academic, too theoretical. We forget the human beings that we're talking about and the human beings that we've lost along the way in this fight.
Let me tell you about another story that really stuck with me about a woman named Anne. So Anne is a woman who has kind of defied all the odds in her life, grew up one of many children, ends up breaking a lot of gender barriers and norms, gets elected to the state house in her state, and is championed by women's groups in order to do this, and then gets there and dismantles a lot of the things that those women's groups built. This woman, Anne, goes on to become the administrator of the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. And she gets up there, and a lot of people start to think, because of her actions, well, it seems like you're here to dismantle the EPA, which may sound familiar to some of us right now. I don't know. And she ends up 2 years into it, having destroyed so much of what was built. People have left, people have been fired, somebody even got convicted, right, of a crime while working for her. So she resigns 2 years into this role in great shame and scandal. And her son is devastated. Her son kind of carries a chip on his shoulder for the rest of his life because of what he saw this country do to his conservative mother. That woman's name is Ann Gorsuch. Her son's name is Neil Gorsuch. So I'm reading this story and I'm like, well, damn, that apple didn't fall far from the tree. And there are two things. There are many things that come out of this for me, but right now, two things. One, when you spoke earlier about how so many of us have, in the ways that Beverly Daniel Tatum reminds us that oppression is a smog, right? Patriarchy is a smog that we've breathed in and we breathe out on each other, even when it was a system designed to destroy us, right? So here is this white woman working against her own interests and the interests of other women. How many of the stories that you had to excavate for this were about those of us that were meant to suffer from patriarchy actually participating in it?
Several. Yeah. And it takes me back to that notion of, but I will say, I also have a lot of compassion for people who don't realize that they're contributing to it. Even if on a certain level they know, okay, I'm hurting somebody else in order to protect myself, they don't realize how they're even hurting themselves in that. Because when we're talking about, I want to be protected and I want to be part of humanity, I want to reap the benefits that are afforded by this system, a lot of folks think that the only path to that is to continue that hierarchy, is to play your role in that hierarchy, because at least you feel you'll get somewhere with that. And so a result of the erasure, largely of even indigenous belief systems that acknowledged more than the gender binary, has been that we don't really even remember that we always had access to something else. And so instead we think that's it. So you not only see it with white women voting against their own interests, which has come up a lot in recent elections, but you see it with men of color also sometimes. We've seen in the last election, there was large concern around Latino men who still overwhelmingly voted for Kamala Harris, that should be noted, but that there was a trend that more of them were voting for Donald Trump. And why might that be? But if you've been tricked into thinking you're just not acting manly enough, that's why you're not getting the access to resources that you deserve. That's why you're not being treated as a human being. You need to be better at this that we're offering you. Then it makes sense why some men would try to replicate that. It makes sense why some women would try to replicate that. It's actually not that huge of a mystery. But one of the many reasons why Black women are such a guiding force in always being able to see past that system is because historically we've been the most separate from it, the most pushed away from it. So when we're thinking about the history of Black womanhood in the US, and specifically during times of slavery, where by law, Black women were told, you're not human, and your children are not human. We're the only ones historically who have been deemed the givers of non-life through our children by law. But Black women never believed that. Black women have always been able to see how made up it all is, how fabricated it all is. Yeah, your law might say that, but I don't believe that. And so I can always envision beyond what's being offered to me. We as a collective can always say, we can build something new. We can do something different. And we not only vote that way, but we march for that. We organize for that. We fight for that. Because we won't accept anything less than a country that is worthy of our children. And so one of the blessings of being pushed so far away from American patriarchy is that it's so easy to see it and study it. It's so easy to understand that there's something else always available to us. We can always choose something else. And especially at a time right now where people are so afraid. And somebody asked me in a recent talk, what do we do right now? This is very scary. Yes, it's scary, but it isn't new. Yes, there's executive orders coming out. But again, it's made up. You can always make up something different. And you can look to Black women. And I don't say that because Black women need more work on our plate.
Amen.
We've done a lot. We've done a lot. But there is an assuredness you will see in Black women. There is a sense of, we told you this was going to happen. So we do need to have more trust. We do need to elect more Black women because we're not experiencing the same shock and awe as a lot of other people.
Yeah. You know, the other thing that this story, though, brings up for me, especially because this is not new, is what it says of Ann Gorsuch's generational legacy, that she parented in such a way that that's who's sitting on the Supreme Court, right? And one of the things you write about as you're telling that story is that with this chip on his shoulder, he goes on to not only be a very conservative kind of mover and shaker in the legal world, but that he specifically aligns himself with conservative principles and decides to lead on those. And for that leadership, he is then rewarded. And I thought it was very interesting to use that word, rewarded with that Supreme Court seat, right? So I'm sitting there thinking about how hard it is already to resist a system that you think if I just play my role, I'll finally get my piece of the pie because I've been taught that power is finite. So I need to get my slice so nobody else can get a hold of it before I do. And then I'm also thinking about how it has to be really impossible when you are seeing people be rewarded for upholding, maintaining, perpetuating, participating in the system. And in as much as I know and fully believe that Black women are divine through and through, I'm also the mother of 2 boys. I know that you are raising 3 children and have a boy. I'm thinking about how we parent against the patriarchy. I'm wondering how you are thinking about raising a different kind of young man. Yeah. Especially after writing this, especially knowing that we can't be raising more Neils in the world.
No more Neils. I think about it constantly. And that brings me to the point that I'm very optimistic, actually. I end the book with a lot of optimism, a lot of hope. There is these shifts we have to make that are not that complicated. It's not that we have to completely take apart our family systems and completely disrupt all of it. It's actually just how we see it differently. So I'm going to get into raising sons, but I first want to talk a little bit about motherhood. And when I was researching all of the theory that I needed for the three mothers, there was a lot that came up in feminist literature around how motherhood is just replicating patriarchy. And so many feminist researchers and writers throughout time have said, we just need to stop having children, and that's the way in which we're being subjugated.
So end the world is the way to end
Well,
patriarchy.
there's a whole book about like just get the sperm donors and don't engage with men. But you can go deep into that rabbit hole. We're not going to do that today. But then when I read Black feminist scholarship, especially thinking about what I was just talking about, how motherhood has been removed from Black women, or there's been this attempted removal. It's this reclaiming of the role. It's how do you see it differently? And June Jordan said, every time a child is born, the world begins again. And to be the steward of that is powerful. It's transformative. We don't have to repeat something. We can transform. And so that's how I view my mothering. And it's how I view all of the different ways in which we can transform our nation together. And it does start within our families. And so in the final section of the book, I talk about what would it look like to be a child in the U.S. up until the day that we all pass away with these little shifts. The largest one for children is, can parents look at them and instead of telling them where they should fit in the hierarchy, instead of from the moment they're born and even before that saying, this is the role that you're going to play, and you don't do that, she does that. But the constant, let's put them in the hierarchy that we've all been taught, and instead say, can you tell us who you are? Tell us what world you've started here. It's that shift in a mindset that will go so much further for us. And I break it down from when they're school-aged to when they are entering relationships to how we should be in our unions and marriages. I'm not saying that you have to completely disrupt marriages. I talk about how I live a pretty traditional life. I married my college sweetheart. We have 3 children together. And I'm not saying we have to dismantle that. I'm saying not everybody has to follow that same path. It's about questioning why we want to tell everybody else to fit something so badly. And it brings me back into attacks against trans people, especially during Pride Month, because a lot of folks who feel so personally about trans people cannot exist, this is not okay, they don't even know why they feel that way. And it goes back to this notion that that's what they believe is their only option for being treated as a human being. And so all of these shifts can take place, and I'll tell a story that talks about how easily we can just change our minds. This is the story of Catherine Switzer. And if anybody remembers this image of a woman running, and she has some numbers across her chest, and there's a man who's trying to get her out of the race. It's like one of the most kind of famous pictures of American patriarchy. In this image, we're seeing this woman, young woman, just trying to run her race. Catherine Switzer was a student at Syracuse University. She loved running, and she wanted to be in the Boston Marathon. And her coach said, well, women cannot, they just cannot run in the Boston Marathon. They just can't. It's physically going to hurt them. Like, they may not be able to have children. You cannot run in this marathon. And she said, if I run it in practice first, will you let me run it officially? And he said, okay, if you can prove that you can run it in practice first, fine. You can sign up for this marathon. So she shows that she can do it. She signs up for the race. She's so excited. She's putting makeup on the morning of, and her boyfriend tells her, why are you putting makeup on? It's going to be so obvious that you're a woman. Like, don't. And she says, I'm not trying to hide the fact that I'm a woman. I'm just running in the race. And so as she's running, this is the first time a lot of these men who are also running see a woman running next to them. And some of them are kind of confused. Some of them are excited. They're proud of her. They're, applauding for her. And then suddenly this older man has his hands on her and he's trying to pull her out of the race. So he was the race manager. His name was Jock Semple. And in that moment, some of the other men around her push him off to try to help her finish. And she gets to finish the marathon. The entire time she's terrified, though, not sure what just happened, but she finishes. And Jock Semple later becomes one of the greatest advocates for women in sports. Okay? It's that simple. He needed this moment where something just shifted, where something was sort of that blip in the matrix. Oh, women can run marathons.
Wow.
Wow. But it's huge because it shows us these are simple shifts. And that's why I also feel very passionate about speaking to anybody about this. For me, it's not really this battle, this war. It's can you start to see the world a little bit differently? Yeah. And when you make that shift, you'll parent differently. You'll love differently. Mm-hmm. You'll think about your life very differently. And I hope at the very least this book does that. It creates that kind of Jock Semple shift.
Before I open it up to Q&A, so please get your thoughts and questions ready, I got to ask you, how do we get a blip in the matrix now? Because this manosphere that we find ourselves in is not only exhausting, but here in Washington, D.C., and I'm very sure these are familiar conversations for all of you, what we keep hearing is, well, we just need the left's Joe Rogan, and then we'll figure it out. As if we only got here because one guy decided to talk about ivermectin on Spotify, and now we're here, right? Clearly, it took a lot more and deep systems to bring us to the place where we are right now. So what is it going to take? Because I know it's not just a leftist Joe Rogan, right? What's the blip in the matrix that helps us shift to a different future, a possible future, and not simply the probable future that we're stuck in right now?
Oh.
Small question right before Q&A. No big deal.
The one simple shift. I mean, the book. I do think that this will help us.
I know that's right. She said, buy the book.
Buy the book. Because we haven't had this before. We haven't had a tool before that traced it all. Yeah. And that's been part of the strategy, is so that we keep feeling so tired. Mm-hmm. We're exhausted of explaining every single time American patriarchy shows itself. And especially women, especially women of color, we've been told, you're just imagining that. That's not really happening. And look how far we've come.
And you get to write books now.
Look at you get to write books. On. Yeah, you're wearing pants. You should be excited.
My goodness. Short pants, no less. Wow.
And, okay, this is going to sound so silly, but when Barbie came out, I had just finished the first draft of the book, went to see it with a girlfriend. And I was very moved by the fact that so many women around me were crying during this movie that I just found entertaining. I was like, oh, great, this is cool. But all these people were crying. And I thought, is this their first time realizing that patriarchy exists? Perhaps. I don't know. But all that movie said was, hey, women, just notice that patriarchy exists, then tell each other about it, and everything's going to be fine after that. So I'm also, the reason I don't want to give such like a simple statement is that we so often just want the people who are most affected by it to do more, lean in, try harder. And why it's not just that. It's not only the mental shift. It's also now, how do we create policy that reflects those shifts? And so on an individual level, yes, we must question ourselves and say, what am I telling myself about my role in this? Have I told myself I'm supposed to dominate other people? Have I told myself it is okay for somebody else to speak over me, or that is my role to play? On a relationship level, how am I replicating that in my friendships, in my marriage and parenting? Am I trying to replicate American patriarchy? Or am I trying to do something else? And I'll tell you what that something else is at the end. On a community level, how are we meeting each other's needs even before this becomes national change? How are we demonstrating that the other things are possible even before our country can implement that? The Rainbow Coalition is one example of that. We've seen actually multiple examples throughout history of people who have seen the blip, who know that it's not real, who know that they can do something else. So I fill this book with those examples of people who remind us at all times we can do something different. And on a national level, then it's how do we vote for this? And so the opposite of American patriarchy is not a country where women have power over men and are controlling men. That's not what I'm advocating for. What I'm advocating for, the opposite, is a country where we each have power within ourselves. And that is actually the definition of democracy. Power vested in the people, all of the people of that nation. American patriarchy does not align with American democracy. But this does. And so even that statement, what we've been protecting, does not align with our ideals of justice and liberty. But we can create that. And that's incredibly exciting. And I want everybody to feel hopeful about that. So I don't know if I fully answered the question.
You did.
But
You did. The paradigm shift, being very clear, very simply, American patriarchy does not align with American democracy. Period. End of sentence. Questions? Thoughts?
Hey, y'all.
fellow author.
Oh, guys. Anna, Brittany, it's always a pleasure to see you both and learn from you both. You said it multiple times. Black women don't need more work and being exhausted. And as we confront patriarchy and other systemic issues day to day, how are you caring for yourselves? Like, what are you doing just to have that optimism or pour into your children? Like, what are you doing for yourselves? Yeah.
Oh, I just take contact naps with my 15-week-old. That's all. Everything is peaceful and perfect when he's laying on my chest to sleep. That's it.
So beautiful. That's so beautiful. I agree. I think that there is so much power in being around children. And when you get the honor of parenting them, you get to see the world through their eyes. They have, the election happened. My youngest, his birthday is November 6th.
Oh, my.
It was great.
Poor baby.
I was at the Balloon Museum. It was awesome. And so it's those moments where you really do get to just have so much peace and imagination, and you're just questioning even the little things. And that really does keep me very optimistic. But also, it just sounds very cliche, but yoga and sleeping. And I will say, I would love to read a little bit of just what Britt was talking about with the chapter titles, because the subtitle is what American patriarchy has hidden from us. So it's what we're trying to reclaim. And as I was thinking through this, I had these moments where I thought, are those words a little bit corny? Are people not going to take it seriously if I say things like intuition and if I say things like interconnectedness? And then I realized, it's American patriarchy again. It's telling me that the things that we actually need to hold on to somehow are too soft, or that maybe a question like that, why would we even ask that? That is a result of us thinking that we don't have access to those things anymore. But that's what we're trying to reclaim. So the way I wrote the sentence, the outline, is each part of the book is the thing we're trying to reclaim. But the chapters in the middle are how those are being taken from us. But the very last chapter each time ends with optimism. So I'll show you. Part 1, our shared humanity and ancient wisdom is what we're trying to reclaim. We have been misled, our stories contorted and buried. Theirs were elevated and romanticized to justify dehumanization and stop us from, and then here's the thing we need to do, writing a different story. Part 2, our intuition and self-determination. Through vicious reminders and heinous violence, we have been subjected to their rules and their hatred of our continued resistance. Part 3, our capabilities and our strength. They have taken our potential, turned it into weakness, so we cannot win, told to never question them, and always doubt what we know to be true for ourselves. Part 4 is our creativity and our joy. With deafening volume and repetition, critique and silencing, they exclude, divide, and limit us. They put us in danger. They do not spare our children. Part 5, our sense of safety and community. None of us are protected from its growing reach, nor its seeds of division, nor its desire to sever, our vision of new possibilities. Number 6 is our interconnectedness and our courage. And this is all positive because I always end with positivity. Regardless, I believe we can win together, recognize one another, create justice, and recover all that has been hidden. Not least of all, our power. Thank you.
Any other burning questions? I think we've got one more. Yes, 2 more. Come on up. Why don't you all ask them back to back, and then you can answer them together.
You talk about Black women not carrying that weight, but it seems like you carry quite the weight to write this book, just for the record. How do we, I think this administration has created such division and fear and pitted people against each other. How do we reconnect those lines and build that connectivity so that we do end in a positive way and reclaim our power?
Thank you for that. And one more question.
All right, thank you. So, and I hope this doesn't put more work on you, but thank you for the book. Thank you for the discussion. It's been really great. And forgive me if this is a wrong characterization, but I feel like in some ways what you've done is similar to what the 1619 Project did for race, and given the history of race and building the country, its institutions, laws, et cetera, but from a patriarchal gender perspective. And so when you talk about the matrix moment, part of it I think is how do we generate the discussion around this in the same way that we were able to generate the discussion, part of it through negative media backlash and other craziness, et cetera, but how do we generate that discussion? And the final part of it is whether or not you plan to do any student study guides to go along with it, like we saw for 1619 Project, a graphic novel version. I would love to see this graphic novel version. So all of those types of ideas for pushing the conversation forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, interconnectedness, and then such an awesome question around all the things I hope to build from this book. The way we find each other and combat the division is to realize how many more of us are outside of American patriarchy. And in fact, it's all of us. Because even those who are the benefactors of American patriarchy, we see them experiencing high levels of depression. We saw the most recent article around Elon Musk and how many drugs he was using. I mean, were we
Claim
surprised?
he denies
No.
vehemently.
I mean, we all could see it though. I was like, what's going on? But that is a common occurrence. And so we're seeing that it's really hurting everybody. Something has to be denied within you if you have been taught your whole life that you either dominate or you're dominated. And to dominate, you can't show any vulnerable side. And so even them, they are being kept from their full potential. And so for me, it's this realization, and hopefully by the end of the book, even if you go into it thinking, oh, okay, I'm going to see it from a Black woman's perspective, and I'm sure that it's mostly going to be talking about how Black women are mistreated. I always talk about the power of Black womanhood. Again, you'll always see that. That'll also be a theme in my books. But I was very intentional on making sure that everybody will have a moment where they're like, oh, now we're talking about me. And so it's really just that realization, more of us are together in fighting this shared enemy. And I'm doing the opposite of dividing us. I'm saying, so let's just do this together once and for all. All of these battles are actually against the same thing. And then in terms of 1619, I so appreciate that. That means the world to me. I'm so grateful to be in conversation with those books. One, 1619, but also Cast and Stand from the Beginning. I love those books. I love those authors very deeply and admire them. And at the same time, I felt like because they were doing such a good job making sure it was undeniable the way racism has been systematized in our country, that there wasn't as much room for them to do that for gender, and understanding how gender and this binary has been used as a tool to dehumanize people of color. And so I wanted to write a complementary text that could sit alongside those, and I think in a way kind of complete this conversation that is so incredibly important that we're having. And so, yes, I do want to write a curriculum for it. I definitely want to have a kid's version or a teenager version of it, if not both. I'm really brainstorming right now because God has given me such an incredible gift with this book, with this idea, but also the fact that it became an instant bestseller just opens up what I can do even more so with it, because so many books come out every day, so many incredible books, and until they get that attention, that support, it's really an uphill battle in a lot of ways. And with Three Mothers, I fought for that to become a bestseller for a year and getting all the excitement up for it, and I'm so grateful that that book has been celebrated. And now I just feel fortunate that I get to do that at the beginning of the journey of this book. And so I feel a responsibility to really turn that into something even more powerful. And I think one of the other things that Nicole Hannah-Jones does so beautifully is not only how she speaks, but also the use of screen projects. And so all three of those books that I just mentioned all had films, whether it was Origin, Stand from the Beginning, again, 1619. And I would love to see something for Erased, because I think that will connect with even more audiences. So I'm cooking up a lot of ideas, and we'll see what happens.
Well, we're here to champion in them all.
Thank you.
Like you, the books that you listed are texts that make the things so clear that you can never unsee it again. Yes. And Erased has absolutely done that. It deserves to be in every hand, every classroom, in every home library, and hopefully very soon on every screen. So we thank you for doing the labor of the research, the writing, especially while raising those children. And most importantly, we thank you for having this conversation with us this evening. Can we give our
Thank
brilliant
you all.
author, Dr. Tubbs,
Thank
another round of
you.
applause?